So maybe you feel like your ideas aren't creative enough, or other times you may not even have any ideas at all. And personally, I definitely know what it's like to see a blank canvas and have absolutely no sense of direction or ideas for my project. The beginning idea part of a project can sometimes be the most intimidating, but with some practice and specific approaches, it can be easier, which is why I made a list of 7 tips to help your idea process. Tip number 1, take a break. I put this tip first because it may really be all that you need to do. And taking a break from creating art can sometimes be the best thing to do, as it allows you to refocus, reset, and rest. Being able to step away to focus on other things is important, and in the long run, it could save you from feeling burnt out, and it may be just what you need to come back feeling more creative than ever. And tip number 2, don't rely on inspiration. So spontaneous inspiration is something that can't really be controlled, and it may not happen often. So if we rely on randomly getting struck with inspiration for the next best idea for our project, we may never actually get to make that project because the inspiration never came. Spontaneous inspiration is rare, and when it does occur is oftentimes fleeting. But what we can do is influence or encourage inspiration. So for example, by reading a new fantasy book, you may get sparked with some new ideas for your own fantasy world that you want to make. Or by watching a new sci-fi show, you may take some inspiration to create your own sci-fi painting. Some other great ways to encourage new ideas is to learn about different topics, cultures, environments, and really just anything that interests you. Even studying other artists' work can help give you some new ideas. So overall, the key here is to actively search for new ideas and inspiration rather than hoping that the inspiration will find you. Tip number 3, the snowball effect. When I was making a portfolio project, I had no idea of what I wanted the final thing to look like. I wasn't too inspired at the beginning, and I just knew I wanted to make a project. So I started off with a very basic, somewhat random theme, which was a bell tower. And with this one idea in mind, I then asked questions such as, where is this bell tower located? What's the architectural style? Do people occupy the tower? What color palette should the tower be? And so on. And eventually this one initial basic idea snowballed into a much more complex and creative project. The anchor point for the project was the bell tower. And by asking these various questions, I was able to fill in the rest of the unknowns. By having an anchor point for our projects, we have something that keeps our work grounded, and we can build around it slowly, answering more and more questions, creating a snowball effect. And eventually our ideas snowball will get bigger and bigger as more ideas stick. And I usually find that the beginning stages of the project are some of the hardest, but that once the snowball gets rolling, it does get easier. But it's important to take this one step at a time though. We don't want to become overwhelmed with the endless possibilities for our project, which leads me to the next tip, which is tip number 4, limiting our options. If you're looking to read a book and you're presented with 200 different options to choose from, you may feel overwhelmed, choosing instead not to read anything at all. And the same thing can happen with our creativity. When we allow ourselves unlimited possibilities when creating, we can often become overwhelmed and not know what to choose. However, if we try and limit the possible amount of choices to, let's say, 3, we now only have 3 different options to choose from, and can be much more certain with our decisions. So when thinking of ideas for your next painting, it may be helpful to reduce the amount or impose some restrictions on your ideas. For example, the next time you may want to try to write down just 3 random things such as a castle, a city, and clouds. And by doing this, we're limiting the possible ideas for our project to 3 main themes, which we can expand upon later. Then choose just one of those ideas for your project's main theme. And from there, you can start asking specific questions and start the snowball effect. And don't worry, you can always make a new project after this one, exploring some of the other themes you didn't choose. But to get to those other projects, we need to actually finish the first one. So I find it helpful to, tip number 5, put a deadline on it. Deadlines might seem scary, but can be a great way to encourage ideas and creativity. If we have all the time in the world to make a painting, we may never actually feel the pressure to start, or we may just be stuck trying to think of the best possible idea forever. Instead, if we limit ourselves to, say, a week to make that same painting, we can't afford to spend too much time worrying about our idea because the painting needs to get made. And so we need to just go with something and see how it turns out without second guessing ourselves. This can also keep us from thinking we need a complex, over-the-top idea, as a deadline might force us to simplify things, which will make things easier in the long run, and sometimes the simpler ideas can even be stronger than the more complex ones anyway. The takeaway here is that having a deadline can be the encouragement we need to get out of our own head and just start creating. But in order to do this, though, it's important to, tip number 6, embrace imperfection. Perfectionism can be a major hindrance when creating. Sometimes it can be difficult to start a new creation due to the fear of it not being as good as the previous piece we made, and other times we may just be generally afraid to make mistakes and never finish anything. Sometimes we might even feel like our ideas aren't creative or good enough, and these thoughts could further inhibit us from even starting our project. Whatever the case, in these moments, it's important to remember that no idea or work of art that you ever create will be perfect, and that it's more important to just finish rather than perfect. The goal is to improve, so you can always make another project after trying to improve on the previous one. Tip number 7, change things up. Having an artistic routine can be great, but some artists may get tired, bored, or even burnt out from doing the same thing over and over again, which might lead to the lack of ideas or creativity. And so changing up the artistic medium can be another great way to get back into an innovative mind space. If you only paint characters in Photoshop, trying to draw in traditional inks may force you to use creative muscles that never really get used. And similarly, if you only use line art in your work, try using a different workflow approach, such as starting with paint. Even the subjects that you paint can be changed up, so if you only usually paint landscape paintings, it can be a great challenge to try drawing some characters. And maybe by drawing those characters, you'll think of a new idea for how you can include the character in your next landscape. And speaking of challenges, creating an art challenge can be another great way to change things up and get you excited to create again. And there's so many different challenges that you can try. For example, only using one brush, limiting your color palette, and doing a sketch a day for a week, and putting a time limit on your drawing can all be good ways to provide a challenge and force you to think in a different way when creating. So basically, the goal here is just to change things up and explore other methods of creating art, which can all be great ways to bring about new ideas. So just remember that it really just takes time and practice to get more confident that you can break through that initial idea phase of any project. But the more you're able to do it, the more you may see that those ideas were there all along. And of course, these are just a few things that I found helpful, but let me know what you do when you're having a hard time coming up with ideas. So thanks for watching, and as always, stay creative.